In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your leg warmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for The Long Rewind. Welcome to The Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa. With me, as always, is Dustin.
The sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom
What could this
dollar
mean?
that tomorrow.
To what do we owe this great pleasure of hearing you sing?
Well, it's Musicals Day on The Long Rewind.
It's Musicals Day here on The Long Rewind. Excellent. So we're talking about musicals of the like musical movies, right, of the 80s?
Yes. Yeah, movie musicals.
Movie musicals. So I'll be interested to hear, you sort of had a different definition of musicals than I did when I first met you. And what's your definition of
I did?
movie musicals? Well, for you, I think a movie musical is not always just people breaking out in song.
No, that's true.
Which I think is most people's, when you say musical to somebody, they think of it's Singing in the Rain or, something where people break out into song in a way that they don't in real life. So
yeah.
What's your definition of a movie musical?
I think I guess a movie where the music is sort of the point of the movie.
Okay.
It's sort of front and center.
Right.
I mean, most of the movies on my list here, Lisa and I are going to do our top 10s of 80s movie musicals here.
Yeah.
Most of these are that kind of musical, people breaking into song, but a lot of them, I guess, are just people performing music diegetically within the film.
Which is different from, say, something like Singing in the Rain or, whatever, where someone does a number, right? Like breaks out into song to express a feeling. And, sometimes they're actually dancing.
Oh, yeah.
There's no singing at all apart from the singing from the track that you're hearing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's maybe I should explain diegesis for people that are not familiar with that term.
Great idea.
Diegetic versus non-diegetic sound. Diegetic sound refers to any sound that is happening within the world of the film itself, and non-diegetic sound is sound that is outside the created world of the film. The big test for determining whether something is diegetic or non-diegetic is whether or not the characters on screen can hear it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if somebody walks into a bar in a scene and you hear music in the background and it's like original score, like symphonic score, and the person walking into the bar can't hear it, that is non-diegetic sound. Whereas if the person walks into the bar and it is a song that's playing from the jukebox in the bar and the character in the movie can hear the music, then that is diegetic sound. And this is a distinction that is important to filmmakers and especially sound designers to create atmosphere and texture and world building for our characters. And I think most of the music of the films on my list is diegetic sound. The musicals have been experimenting with this for a long time.
Diegetic versus non-diegetic?
Yeah. Or like ways to put music into a movie that is maybe non-traditional. There's still experimentation being done. I mean, that movie Once, the Irish film that became a huge sensation, won an Oscar for Best Song. That came out around 2000, I don't remember, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that area. And that was that was heralded at the time because it was such a low budget movie. It was made for no money whatsoever, as this very interesting structural experiment in making a movie musical by having the characters actually be like street performers and be performing the music and going into, either busking on the streets or going into a studio to record a track or rehearsing music in their kitchen, and just these sort of very intimate situations that you don't usually see in musicals, which is a genre that, historically kind of leans itself to a bigger landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it was more realistic than fantasy, right?
Yeah.
The musical sequences were more like, this could actually happen in real life, as opposed to when you see a movie musical and you're like, yeah, this is fantasy. It's not a normal thing that you would see in real life. So, yeah, that movie is probably the one where you introduced me to this concept I hadn't considered of a movie musical that is not, your traditional, like, I keep using Singing in the Rain, but that type of thing where I was like, oh, wait, that's a musical too? So I just bring it up as sort of an interesting...
So I sent you a list that I found of all the musicals that came out in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So that you would have something from which to build your top 10. Were you struck by anything in particular, just broadly looking at the whole of them? Were you surprised by how many musicals there were in the 1980s, which is a decade that is maybe not remembered particularly for being a golden age of movie musicals?
Right. I suppose I was, but again, a lot of it was sort of getting used to this idea of like not having thought of some of these as musicals and then realizing, oh yeah, I guess they kind of are. So,
right.
And I, struck also by the idea of, I don't know that they're dance movies, but there's a lot of movies that center around dance in the 80s, dance and music, without, the characters singing, I guess is what I'm saying. So, that's a little bit different too. I don't know what struck you about this decade.
Well, I did notice that a lot of the movies I really loved as a kid, I would say I wasn't necessarily thinking about them at the time as musicals, but in retrospect, they certainly were, because that was a lot of those movies are on my top 10 list. Here, these are movies I watched over and over again as a kid and knew all the words to all the songs with.
Yeah.
Or therein as a kid. So yeah, that was something that kind of struck me as I was looking at the broad list.
I think another thing that strikes me right now as I'm sitting here thinking about it is that connection between the music video in the 80s and how a lot of these movies, and you might have a lot to say about that as someone who's a bit of a 80s music video aficionado, and who's taught that kind of concept. That's another thing I'm thinking of now is like there's a lot of reflection of the music video in these musicals, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it sort of manifests itself in a number of ways, one of which is that music videos, because they were so celebrated in the 80s, became a real training ground for directors that moved into feature films.
Yeah.
So you had filmmakers like Russell Mulcahy, who did Highlander and some other movies, cut his teeth on music videos. And then when he moved into motion pictures, he brought his aesthetic with him. And music videos were so trendy and important, and MTV was so important that the aesthetic and style, the editing style, the look of them just naturally found its way into feature films.
Yeah.
Even more than in other television, although certainly we got Miami Vice, and that's a show that came straight out of MTV. But I think maybe because movies had a larger budget available to them, generally, they were able to do more with the music video aesthetic. And so certainly, as I'm looking at my list, there's some very MTV-esque films on this list for sure. The other thing I think that happened was related to this is that it was a real era for the soundtrack album.
I was just going to say that
and that
too.
happened. That blew up at the end of the 70s with the two Travolta movies, Saturday Night Fever and Grease, both of which had these massive soundtracks. Saturday Night Fever, the soundtrack was the biggest selling record of all time until Thriller came along in the early 80s or mid 80s, whenever that was. There was some corporate synergy involved there that some of these media companies started to consolidate. And so you would have a company that owned both the movie studio releasing the movie, but then it would also own the record label releasing the soundtrack. And it might own a stake in some television network or whatever. So you just started to see
That's interesting.
There was a very smart, like when I teach a music video class at my university, and I always show the movie Footloose in the class, and we talk about how that film was marketed and how the music videos were released in the weeks, like they doled them out slowly in the weeks leading up to the release of the film.
Yeah.
And then there was like a television special, and there was a lot of multimedia cross-platform, if you will, promotion around, and it was all centered around the music from the film.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, I don't know if this is true. Did they ever release soundtracks before the movie came out as sort of a hype thing? I mean, I could kind of see that happening. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a couple of weeks they would start releasing singles and videos. And most of these music videos at the time were composed of clips from the films,
movie. So
of
they
course.
Act as promos.
So they kind of function almost as like 4-minute trailers.
Yeah.
Certainly Purple Rain was big in that. There are scenes from Purple Rain that are just sort of excerpted whole from the movie that became music videos. Yeah. Dirty Dancing did a lot of that too. Footloose was a big one, of course. Flashdance was kind of an early version of this. So yeah, it was big. It was a big part of it.
I think personally, soundtracks were one of the types of like cassette, if you will, that I wanted to own the most. I remember just really wanting a lot of movie soundtracks. It was one of my favorite things.
I mean, the first cassette tape I ever got when I got my boombox as a little kid was Footloose. That was the tape my parents bought me with that and a couple K-Tel collections.
Yeah.
Hot Tracks and Hit Explosion. I still remember the names.
Awesome.
Yeah. But you're right. They're essentially compilation albums of people that were popular at the time. Yeah. So I had the Miami Vice TV soundtrack.
Nice.
I played the heck out of that. I played the Top Gun soundtrack until it wore out.
I remember my brother.
The Eddie and the Cruisers soundtrack.
Yeah.
Certainly had Grease.
Yeah.
I had Beat Street. I had Breakin'.
Nice. Yeah. Nice.
In some cases, I had the soundtracks and never saw the movies. I never saw Beat Street until I was in like college, but I had that cassette as a kid and I used to play it all the time. I knew by the time I saw the movie, I knew all the songs in it.
I mean, I remember my brother having the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack.
Oh, I love that
which
soundtrack.
Was a great soundtrack. Yeah. And Cocktail, which I'm not sure that's an 80s movie, is it?
It is 80s
Okay,
movie,
so he had both of those.
I had that soundtrack.
I didn't see
Kokomo.
Kokomo.
What was that Bobby McFerrin song?
Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Yeah, those
there
were
was
big.
Some good stuff on that.
So what I'm saying, I'm agreeing because I heard those soundtracks constantly and didn't see those movies till I was an adult. So,
yeah, I know.
So, I mean,
your brother's younger than me, and I didn't see Cocktail as a kid, so I'm guessing he didn't either.
I don't think he probably saw it. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but yeah.
I wonder if he's seen it to this day.
That's a good question. I'll have to ask him. I don't know if he's seen it, to be honest with you. I'll ask him.
He should. Cocktail is hilarious.
Yeah, maybe we can watch it at Christmas.
But it is really fun.
John, maybe we can watch it at Christmas.
Yeah, there you go.
It'd be fun. Yeah.
All right, should we get into our top 10s?
Yeah, sounds good.
Did you do a top 10? Because this is another one of these where I was like, oh, I love these movies so much, and I just kept going.
Well,
and then I got to 15 and I was like, I should just stop and then make a quick like honorable mention section. So that's what I did.
That's what I did too. I did a top 10 and I did an honorable mentions because there were way more than 10 that I love and enjoy. But so I ranked 10 of them and then I had an honorable mention section. So yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and read me your honorable mentions.
My honorable mentions. Okay. Electric Dreams, Hairspray, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Annie, Staying Alive, Breakin', Fame, Pennies from Heaven, The Little Mermaid, Stop Making Sense, and Little Shop of Horrors. I mean, some of those are great, so don't get me wrong. It's not like they're not worthy of ranking, but
no, there's some definite crossover. Mm-hmm. Here's my honorable mention list.
Okay,
Xanadu,
of course,
Little Shop of Horrors, The Muppets Take Manhattan, Rappin'.
Oh, Rappin' made it. Nice.
Breakin' 2, Pennies from Heaven, Flashdance, Fame, Electric Dreams, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and Hairspray.
Awesome.
Yeah. I also made a separate list of concert movies.
Oh, yeah.
Which I kind of thought of as different from movie musicals, but there were some great ones. Queen Rock Montreal.
I've never seen that. I'm sure
Divine
it's
Madness, which is a Bette Midler one, which is very funny.
Yeah.
Police Around the World, just Police is my favorite band, so I love that documentary.
Of course.
Chuck Berry's Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, Sign of the Times by Prince.
Wow.
And then Sting's Bring on the Night, which is a Michael Apted documentary, which is just fantastic.
Is that?
I mean, I'm partial to it because I love Sting.
You're a big Sting fan,
But
yeah.
even if you don't, it's actually a really interesting movie about the formation of a band and kind of what was at stake for Sting in his career at that time, because it was filmed just as he was leaving Police when they were the biggest band in the world and embarking on a jazz-influenced solo career, which is very different from the sort of pop punk of this band he was in.
Yeah.
And, he's sort of wondering, what am I doing?
Is this going to work?
Yeah, is this going to work? And it's just a really interesting movie. And because it's Michael Apted, it's shot
really well
and edited in ways that are kind of creative.
I think I have seen this. This is the one where they're kind of all at one of his big houses, and it isn't his wife Trudy, isn't she like about to have a baby or something? Yeah. It's a great movie, and it actually has a pretty decent like narrative feel to it. And
and of course, I think the greatest concert movie of all time came out in the 80s, and I think Lisa mentioned it in her honorable mentions was Stop Making Sense.
Oh yeah, I love it. Yeah,
which great. Is the album from Talking Heads.
Talking Heads.
And if you haven't seen it, it's definitely, even if you're not a Talking Heads fan, it's definitely worth seeing. It's directed by Jonathan Demme, and it's one of those rare concert movies, almost kind of like Gimme Shelter, the
Rolling Stones.
The Rolling Stones one that kind of transcends its form, and it does it through its. I don't know. It's the stage. You could say all the things I guess I would praise it for. I would just also say about the stage show, but it's a wonderful capturing of the stage show. The camera is always in the right place. The editing is always very in tune with the music in ways that are very interesting. It never shows you the audience until the very end. And so it feels very contained and it feels very intimate and it feels like it's just you and the band in some ways.
Yeah.
And it has that, because the stage show had this too, it just has a very kind of interesting, almost narrative structure itself. Like it starts out with just, why am I blanking on his name?
David Byrne.
David Byrne.
Yeah.
By himself out there. And then with every song, they like add another member or two of the band. And it has this kind of interesting arc to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I have to say, I haven't seen that many concert movies just in general. That's one of few I've seen, and it's wonderful. A lot of the ones you mentioned sound great, but I haven't seen them. So maybe that's definitely a big gap in my viewing that should be corrected. Probably. Yeah.
It's Stop Making Sense is probably my favorite.
Yeah, it's great.
Concert movie, although I would argue that Gimme Shelter is probably better. I just don't like the Rolling Stones like I like
like you like the Talking Heads. Yeah, I haven't seen that. I know it's famous. It's super famous. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's a concert movie that feels like a horror film. And it is pretty harrowing.
That's
movie.
what I've heard. Yeah. The other one that's not from the 80s that I like is the Woodstock one, the Martin Scorsese.
I forgot
that
about
one's
Woodstock.
Really,
Woodstock
fabulous.
is probably better.
Yeah. That's really great.
That's a really, really great movie.
But not from this decade, obviously.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah. Okay, so let's do our top 10.
Yeah.
We'll just do it the way we usually do it. If either of us says a movie that's on the other person's list, we can just talk about it and then move forward.
Do you want to talk criteria here? Did you have any particular criteria?
Basically, just what I said. I guess it's sort of movies I like, movies I want to rewatch, and movies where I felt like the music was the point of the movie, or provided the movie with its beating heart. I guess.
Yeah. The
movie, even if it was a narrative film that wasn't about the music, like the music was still driving the movie forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to say anything about your criteria?
I mean, as usual, I think my overriding principle is, do I love this movie and watch it a lot? That's usually my overriding principle. But I agree that I think I thought about, is the music important? Does it? Yeah.
So I should run through my bottom 5 real quick because I actually did.
You did a 15?
I actually did 15.
You love a musical. You do.
I
movie
really
musical.
Like musicals. Yeah, I like them from all eras.
I should say you like a movie musical. That's
I do.
The thing
I really,
you like the
really
most.
love.
Yeah.
They're just so rewatchable, and
they really are.
They're just like They're really fun. I mean, the only one I can think of that is designed to bum you out is Pennies from Heaven, which is a good movie, but not a pleasant.
No.
Not a pleasant watch. But in all other cases, like every movie I'm about to list are movies that I would put in to make me feel good, to have a good time.
I mean, I admit I put Pennies from Heaven on honorable mentions because I think there's a lot of brilliant stuff in it, but I probably wouldn't watch it again, to be honest. So it didn't make the top 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For people that don't know, it's a Herbert Ross set during the Depression. I followed Steve Martin as a songwriter.
And a song salesman.
During the Depression. Yeah. And it's a lot of it's set in his head, almost in the way that Chicago is kind of inside the head of Renee Zellweger's Roxy Hart character. This is kind of similar.
Yeah, it is like that.
He sees idealized versions of the world that don't really exist, and they present themselves to him through musical fantasy sequences.
Yeah, very
but
well
the movie
done.
itself is like it's very sad.
Yeah, like the stuff that really happens in his life and other people's lives.
Yeah, it's
really
pretty horrible.
Very bleak, but I think the sequences are kind of brilliant.
Yeah. So I guess that's another thing I would add to my criteria is how good does the movie make me feel when I'm watching it?
Right.
Like how much active fun am I having when I'm sitting there viewing it?
That's true. I didn't pick anything that I don't like super enjoy and that makes me happy.
Having said all that, I now do see one movie in my bottom 5, my 11 to 15 here that is also pretty sad.
Oh, well, that's okay.
But
let's hear it.
The music is it's such a beautiful movie.
Okay.
I had to put it in there. All right. Anyway, my number 15 was Staying Alive.
Oh yeah.
That was on your
honorable mentions.
Honorable mentions,
yeah.
right?
But that's only because I did a top 10, not 15. So
yeah.
Staying Alive is amazing.
So a notoriously terrible movie. It's very funny. Not always intentionally so.
Usually not intentionally.
It's a sequel to Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
And it was directed by Sylvester Stallone, who has a hilarious cameo.
Yep.
It's a very strange movie in which John Travolta proves it's kind of, in some ways, wouldn't you agree that it is the ultimate test of John Travolta's charm?
Yes,
because his character is so repugnant. Like the things he does, he's such a prick.
Yeah.
And you still kind of like him because it's John Travolta.
You're like, I feel bad, but I still kind of like him. I mean, he's he's got that it factor, right? So
the music is crazy.
Really crazy.
Crazy. It's Frank Stallone and the Bee Gees come back for a few songs, but this is post-disco Bee Gees. Yeah. So they're kind of trying other stuff. And I find it weirdly all very listenable. I would totally listen to the Staying Alive soundtrack.
I mean, I would challenge anyone not to like just get up and dance and feel pumped up to Far From Over, which is the song that I think opens the film. It's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
All right. My number 14 was the Blues Brothers.
Love that. That was my number 7. I love Blues Brothers.
What do you love about the Blues Brothers?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I just think it's kind of unique. Super fun, amazing musical sequences. I mean, you get everyone from Ray Charles to Aretha Franklin to Cab Calloway. I mean, come on. The musical sequences are amazing in terms of who they've gotten, and just really, it's super fun. It's a hoot, right? It's a madcap hoot, I think.
Yeah, it's huge.
It is huge.
It's like the scope of it is insane. It has the most craziest car chase. It uses Chicago in ways that are super fun.
And Illinois. I mean, not even just Chicago, right? Just generally Illinois. And I also think it's got just like a little bit of absurdity going on.
A little bit.
So.
The whole Carrie Fisher character subplot, like it's really absurd. It's very absurd.
So
I mean, it's nuts. The way they trash the mall, that sequence where they drive through the mall. Yeah.
I like the way John Landis does absurd, I guess.
Yeah. So, it's wild. And you're right. The soundtrack is great. And weirdly, Belushi can sing.
Yeah, you can.
Like they did assemble like a truly great. Paul Schaefer, I think, led the band.
Oh, is that
right?
Okay.
Assembled the actual band, but they're a really good band. I mean, it's some of the best, kind of R&B players, session musicians of that era. Yeah, and Belushi could carry a tune. Yeah,
I mean, it's fun, right? It's super fun.
My number 13 was Beat Street.
Nice. Okay.
Beat Street was a sister movie that came out at the same time as Breakin'. They were kind of racing each other to get into the theater. Breakin' got in first because it was a Cannon film. If you don't know who Cannon is, listen to our episode about the Cannon Films studio. very interesting place. Beat Street was a studio movie, though. It was a bigger studio movie, and it has a broader... It's about street culture, kind of. It's about
It's more about hip hop, more broadly,
it's about hip hop
right?
culture in the early 80s.
In New York,
it follows a DJ, like a turntablist. It follows a rapper. It follows a graffiti artist as they all try to make it. And I wouldn't necessarily call it probably realistic. It's still movied up.
I'm sure that's true, yeah.
But it's certainly, compared to like some of the other hip hop movies of that era, like Breakin' and Crush Groove and some of the goofy Disorderlies. I mean, some of these goofball hip hop themed movies from that era. It feels
a little more.
It feels
real.
a little like it has a little more verisimilitude. Yeah.
Is that the one? There's like a really fun 3-girl rap group. I love that. That's a great.
Us Girls.
Yeah, Us Girls. That's great. And is this also the one where the fat boys go to Sparrow, or is that a different one?
No, that's Crush Groove.
Oh, okay, because that's a really fun scene. But yeah, not
Beat Street has it's Ray Don Chong.
Okay.
She gets in this kind of romantic relationship with this guy that wants to be a DJ.
Okay.
Yeah.
Watch out for those DJs.
Watch out for those DJs.
Cool.
Last night one saved my life.
That's right.
My number 12, this is my sad entry. My only sad entry on the list, but it's not totally sad because it has an uplifting ending, although it's bittersweet. It's the animated film The Last Unicorn.
Oh, I didn't think about that one. Yeah.
Which all the music is done by a yacht rock group from the 70s called America.
Yeah, it's lovely stuff.
It's all quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And the film itself is about regret. And it's very deep. It's based on a acclaimed young adult novel by Michael Ende, and it is it's harrowing at parts and deeply unsettling and sad in parts. And it's not really a movie for kids, although kids could watch it. They would probably enjoy the animation.
Kids certainly did watch it back in the 80s.
They did, yeah. It was the first movie we ever took my sister to when she was really young. Yeah, she talked through the whole thing and got us in trouble.
So I don't think it really affected her too much, it sounds like.
No.
She was okay.
Probably too young to be in the movie. My number 11 is another Travolta classic, Urban Cowboy.
Ooh, fun. Oh, yeah.
Which it really captures a very small, specific scene at a very short, determined time. Yeah. Which is FM country music. Yeah. In the early 80s.
I will say, I wonder how, the scene you're talking about that's depicted in the movie was probably small, maybe, but I feel like that was a pretty big trend / fad. I mean, it affected my house on Long Island. I feel like we listened to a lot of that crossover country
small,
music.
I mean, it was there and then it was kind of gone.
It was very fast.
It was like lightning in a bottle. And it was huge.
It was really huge. Yeah.
The film itself is based on a story for like a Vanity Fair, GQ, or one of those magazines, one of those New York maybe, about Gillies, which was Mickey Gilley. He was a country western singer. He owned a honky tonk in, oh man, now I'm blanking on where it is.
Is it in Texas somewhere?
It is in Texas. Yeah, I just can't remember which city off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it was like a world unto itself. You know, it was everybody that lived around there that was into that music, even remotely, went there every single night. Yeah. And it had its own dramas and feuds and, romance and comedy and
soap opera.
Yeah, it was a soap opera. And Travolta is, as a Texan oilman, is way out of his depth in terms of he's just not the right guy to cast in the part, but he's perfectly good in it because he's such a great performer. He's such a magnetic performer.
Well, and his dancing.
His dancing is incredible.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, he does all the country dancing moves.
Yeah.
The real standout from that movie is Deborah Winger, who is just unbelievable in that movie. Like, she's so great. It's one of the really awesome performances by an actress, I think, in that decade.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's
great music.
It's super fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're into our top 10. Why don't you
Okay.
start us with your 10?
Well, my 10 has one from your honorable mention. It's a tie
Yeah.
between Grease 2 and Xanadu, which
Okay.
are, to me, sort of similar, like super fun, makes you smile, makes you happy, or makes me smile and happy kind of wacky musicals.
Yeah.
That's my 10.
Yeah, they're both dumb as a door.
Yep.
They both have really fun music.
Yep.
They both have been critically maligned over the years, but then also turned into cult movies and kind of rediscovered by new generations who are kinder to them than audiences were when they originally came out.
Yeah.
Both of those movies were gigantic bombs
Yeah.
when they came out. But yeah, they're both crazy fun. Grease 2 is my number 6.
Yeah, you're a big Grease 2 fan,
I'm a big,
for
big,
sure. Do you want to
big
talk
Grease 2
about
fan.
Grease 2 a little bit?
Yeah, I thought, it was on HBO all the time, which is how I saw it as a kid and learned all the songs.
Yep.
And I knew all my friends liked it because we all used to sing the songs, Cool Rider and Back to School Again. And we, Score Tonight
Score
from
Tonight.
the bowling alley. We
Yeah.
used to sing these songs all the time. And so I was surprised when I got a little older and found out it was considered this horrible turkey.
Right. Yeah, everybody,
And
I
then-
never saw it, but everybody
and then
I knew
like
liked it
another,
too.
however much time goes by, and then the internet comes along.
Yeah.
And then I discover that like there are a lot of people like me out there who actually prefer this movie to Grease, which is, I recognize blasphemy, and I can tell you this. I know this is not as good as Grease. I know it's not.
Just as a movie and et cetera.
And I've seen Grease a million times and I love it. I could recite both movies.
Of course.
If I had to pick, if you were sending me to a desert island and you said, Dustin, you can only take one Grease with you, I'm taking Grease too. It's not even there's no contest.
It's a controversial take, but I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer is just awesome. She explodes off the screen, her first big part. She was very young. It's directed by the choreographer from the first movie, Pat Birch. And so I think, actually, maybe it has like the best shot dances I can think of a musical in that era.
And very creative, like super creative sequences.
I mean, she knew how to
shoot
a dance scene for sure. Yeah, there's some really cool stuff. That bowling alley sequence has some really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, the Score
She puts the
Tonight
camera
sequence.
in places that you wouldn't necessarily think to do so, unless I think maybe you were a choreographer
Yeah, that
and you
makes a lot of
understood the
sense.
dance. Yeah. There aren't too many cases of like the choreographer also being
the
director.
I think Kenny
Ortega.
He became a director, so that probably
He
happened
did.
a few
He
times
didn't
for
direct
him,
Dirty
but-
Dancing, but he did become a director.
he was the choreographer, I think.
Yeah,
But he did go on to direct.
Yeah. He directed mostly nonfiction stuff. I think he directed like Michael Jackson's stage show.
He did Gilmore Girls.
Oh, did
for
he
a
really?
While. And I don't know if he did like a lot of it, but he did do some episodes.
I think
of
Rob
Gilmore
Marshall,
Girls.
who directed Chicago, I think he started as a choreographer too.
Interesting.
Maybe.
So there's like a connection there, but maybe not always to go and then do dance movies or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, those are great choices. I suspect my number 10 is on your list somewhere. It's True Stories.
Yes, that was at number 5 for me. I love True Stories.
Yeah. So it's David Byrne from the Talking Heads, who we were talking about earlier. He directed this film, which is
Maybe
kind of
even
a
wrote it. Did he
kind of
write
an
it
early
too?
version of a mockumentary.
Except I would not call it mocking. It's got such an interesting tone. Like it is not a
Well, I don't
Christopher
mean
Guest
mockumentary
movie.
as in
No, I know,
making
but it
fun
like
of.
mocks
I mean,
the
as in fake documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just mean I just want to draw attention to its interesting tone, which you wouldn't normally see, I think. Yeah. It's got a very loving, sweet tone to
he
it.
goes to a small town in Texas, kind of as I'm not even sure you'd call him a filmmaker. He's just like your guide.
Yeah.
He's like this eccentric guy who
Your
guides you
narrator.
into this small town in Texas to meet the denizens of the town.
Yeah.
Who are all very eccentric, and they're based on, and the movie gets its title from David Byrne's interest in newspapers like the Weekly World
tabloids,
News.
yeah.
Tabloid papers, so he was reading stories about like, boy with one foot abducted by aliens, and he kind of got this idea that what if there was a town,
Just a town full
kind
of
of an
these
all-American town that was inhabited entirely by people that would show up in these papers. But even that doesn't describe it perfectly well. And it's full of charming, wonderful musical numbers written by David Byrne and the Talking Heads.
Yeah. I mean, even like when you think about this idea of it being connected with the Weekly World News, there's also nothing that feels like exploitative about it or I don't know, seedy. It's just very kind of sweet and almost celebratory.
Yeah, it's very charming.
Yeah, it's really great. I love it.
What's your number 10? Oh, we got that.
We did number 10.
What's your number 9?
My number 9 is Labyrinth. You know, I love Labyrinth.
You do love Labyrinth, yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's not like widely acclaimed or anything, but I love it. I don't know if that probably didn't show up anywhere on any of your lists.
It didn't. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm not the fan of it that I know you are.
I like the aesthetic of it. I mean, it's got David Bowie. How can I be upset about that? It's got fun Muppet sequences.
I love that song that plays when they're in the dance, when she comes into the beautiful dance.
Like When the World Falls Down.
Yeah, When the World Falls Down. That song is unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah, and of course
let's Dance Party or whatever the hell that song is that he's singing where he's throwing the kid up in the
Magic.
air. Dance Magic, yes.
Yeah, that's
a delightfully cuckoo.
It's kooky,
number.
It's Muppets, it's Jim Henson, and of course I connected with the female heroine in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
and
the beautiful young Jennifer Connelly.
Yes, she's great in it, or she's very luminescent in it. And I don't know, I like the feel of it, I like the tone of it, and David Bowie's wacky but fantastic.
Yeah. I think what holds it back for me is that I don't respond to its soundtrack.
That's fair.
As much as I would want to.
That's
especially
fair.
for a David Bowie
meets
movie.
Muppets. Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
My number 9 was Purple Rain.
Oh, that was my number 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh, this is awfully low.
Well, there's a lot of really
Prince, but it shows you like how many kind of fun musicals there were.
Yeah.
It is a great movie. It is, I guess, maybe the reason I would maybe knock it down a few pegs in terms of it competing with the other musicals of the era are that it does feel like a concert movie with a narrative grafted onto it. Yeah. And that's fine. I wouldn't ask any more of it.
And
I've watched it a million times. I think that's great. I think it's fun. I've never seen a concert movie like that with a narrative grafted onto it like that.
Yeah.
And the concert scenes are so good that it wouldn't matter.
Oh my God, yeah. They're amazing.
So
of course.
I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, that's also really classic for musicals, movie musicals, and regular musicals throughout the ages. Is like the whisper thin plot holding together a bunch of amazing musical sequences. Yeah. It doesn't. I think I have the same feeling about it. That's probably why it's not higher. I mean, of course, incredible musical sequences. I don't respond as much to maybe the narrative that's crafted onto it, and I think Prince seems also like kind of a jerk.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, much like Staying Alive.
Yeah, much like Staying Alive.
It asks you to root for a character who is really like kind of a real jerk.
Yeah, so especially as an adult, that becomes a little less attractive. But I mean, you can't argue with the music and the performances. Yeah. They're incredible.
My only other beef narratively with Purple Rain is that through the whole movie, people keep telling him that nobody cares about his music but himself, which doesn't make sense for two reasons. One is that every time he's on stage, he's the greatest live performer who's ever lived.
Yes.
And that's obvious. And you'd have to be like a moron to not see that.
Yeah.
And secondly, in all of those sequences, they always show the audience is going crazy.
Yeah.
So even the audience on screen sees that he's great, and then he goes backstage and like the club manager comes back and he's like, nobody cares about your music but you. It's like, where were you, man? Were you just out front? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So this idea that like by the end of the movie he's earned the respect through his music of everybody kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
When you think about it, is there really any arc for that character in the movie?
I think he becomes like, if he's like a a 10 on the jerk scale. He's
Right.
only like a 7 by the end.
Okay, I guess there's
He's
that
slightly
sort
less
of
jerky because of,
a little less.
Well, he
yeah.
learns about his dad's
right struggles. and,
struggles with,
Yeah.
So, and maybe he's like a little nicer to Apollonia
A
at the end of the
little,
movie than
not
he
a
is at the
lot.
beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, I was just curious if you thought
He
there was
does
an arc.
take
Yeah.
Wendy and Lucy's,
That's true.
Wendy and Lisa's
Lisa.
music.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
writes a song for
Okay.
it when
Yeah.
previously he had dismissed them.
That's a good point. Okay, that's a big change. Fair.
That movie was directed by a guy named Albert Magnoli, who was an editor who I think also did a lot of music video work, and you could see it in
Yeah.
that film. That film, especially the opening like 10 minutes of that
Yeah.
movie, is essentially just a big extended music video.
It's wonderful. Yeah. You
Yeah.
know, you're going to sit and watch the rest of it based on that alone, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we get your number 9? Oh,
It was Labyrinth.
Okay,
And
what's your number 8?
Purple Rain was my 8. So,
Oh, Purple's your 8.
yeah.
My number 8, I wonder if it's your number 1. It's Dirty Dancing.
It is my number
Is that your number 1?
Yes, of course.
All right. Well, you've talked about it before on this show. But
have,
why don't
yeah.
you just recap really quick what takes Dirty Dancing to the... This might be your favorite movie of the 80s, right?
It might be. It's definitely up there. It might
All right.
It probably
give
is
us
my favorite.
give us your elevator pitch.
I'm terrible at elevator pitches, so I don't know if I can do that. But it's hard. And I think this is one of the movies on this list that I didn't come to as an adult. So there's also like that nostalgia thing that you often talk about where it's like, I mean, I do think it's legitimately good. So I don't think I'm just loving it for nostalgia's sake, but that's certainly part of my connection to it. I just think... I think Patrick Swayze is electric in this movie. I think him and Jennifer Grey together are wonderful. The dancing's fantastic. The music is great. I mean, it's all these wonderful, mostly, that's not true. There's some like contemporary songs, but it's all these great, early 60s
Can I ask a question,
classics.
though?
Yeah.
So...
Oh boy, you're going to like question my love for Dirty Dancing?
No.
here?
I mean, I put it on my list, obviously, in the top 10. I just gave it a spot above Purple Rain.
Yeah, that's true.
So
That's true,
I obviously really like it. I didn't at the time it came out.
It was a girl
saw it
movie.
and I was like,
Yeah.
that is a girl's movie. Like, I don't want to see that.
Not watching that. Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess my question has always been about the mixture of 80s pop songs and
Yeah.
60s
It's weird.
rock.
Yeah.
And how they kind of, I think it's actually done very well because while you're watching the movie, you're not really noticing the, I don't know, what's the word for that when it doesn't really...
The anachronistic.
the anachronistic kind of nature of that.
That's true.
But at the end of the movie, I'm always like, especially in that last scene where they're dancing to
The
the
I've
time
Had
of my life.
Uh-huh.
And I'm always like, well, why don't all the people in this Catskills auditorium, why aren't they having the same reaction that like the kids have to Marty McFly playing Johnny Be Good in Back to the Future? They should be like, they should hear that song and be like, what the hell is this? Did this come from Aliens? Because it's a very 80s sounding pop song. It doesn't make any sense in that setting.
There is a hat tip to that idea in that scene when the band leader supposedly strikes up this music. Max Kellerman, the head of Kellerman's, says to him, "What's that actor's name? I forget that actor's name. The guy from Rad, Max.
Oh
Kellerman.
yeah.
I can't think of his name. Jack something.
Jack. Yeah.
Anyway, he says to the band leader, he says, "Hey, you got sheet music for this stuff?" Like in a confused way. So there's like a little hat tip to the fact that this is not of the time, a very small hat tip. I don't know what to tell you otherwise, except that, there's a lot of fantasy in this movie and
That's true.
It's not, straight up.
It's a good thing I didn't direct
realism.
it because it would have been full of shots of people in the audience going, "What is this?"
Well, and I think, obviously you're there. I think the idea in that ending scene is they're just amazed at what they're seeing, right? This guy who's been fired is broken in with his posse to have this big dance at the end of the season. And this girl who nobody knows who she is, except that she was kind of a bookworm, so I think that's supposed to be the focus for the crowd. Is my guess. But I'm not sure what else your question is.
It is a fun. I did have the soundtrack. as a kid.
Yeah,
I didn't have the
I did
sequel
too.
soundtrack like you did,
Oh,
More
gosh.
Dirty Dancing.
I
But I
mean,
had
these-
the original.
Those were
Like
two.
every boy of that era, I used to like to sing She Breaks the Wind instead of
She's Like the Wind.
She's Like the Wind.
Yeah.
She Breaks the Wind, yeah.
Those were probably my two
And
most...
I took Hungry Eyes and turned it into a jingle for a restaurant called Hungry Pies,
You did.
which I think
You
was
did.
important.
Yes. Well, those were my two probably most prized cassette tapes. I had
Yeah.
Dirty Dancing and More Dirty Dancing. And let's not forget that this was a big phenomenon at the time, too. There was a stage show that toured the country that they took around with people, professional dancers.
Was it your cousin's destruction of your More Dirty Dancing cassette that first led you into therapy?
I didn't know if we were going to end up talking about that. Yeah,
Okay.
that was a rough moment for me. I was very upset. I had, Dirty Dancing and More Dirty Dancing.
The fact that I know about it shows that you still haven't entirely gotten over it.
Yeah, I had a little Fisher Price, cassette player that I would play it in, and they rewound it or fast forwarded it one too many times, and it just kind of got eaten up and messed up.
I haven't heard this part of the story. So
I think that's what happened.
It got eaten up in your tape deck?
Because of what they were.
How was this your cousin's fault?
Well, because they were the ones. I think that's what happened. I don't.
But you should have kept your tape deck clean if you didn't want it eating your tapes. That's not your cousin's fault that she happened to be the one using the tape deck.
Oh my God! I can't believe you're accusing me.
No, you're right. I shouldn't take her side.
This is terrible. This is going off the rails here.
All right, my numbers. What's your number 7?
It was Blues Brothers.
Okay, my number 7 is Breakin'.
Uh-huh.
Did that make your list?
That was in my honorable mentions. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a movie I love as a kid.
You love Breakin'.
What more can I say about it that I haven't said in other episodes of this podcast? Listen to the Canon Films podcast again. I talk about Breakin'. They really started the breakdancing as a film cliche motif, whatever you want to call it. Certainly breakdancing was around before that, or they wouldn't have latched onto it. But they really brought it into movies in a way that made it a huge hit and, successful not just in that film, but in other films. Although I guess I should also note that Flashdance did have the first breakdancing.
Oh, yeah.
Not Breakin'.
That's right.
But Breakin' was the first movie that was literally just all about breakdancing.
Yeah, that was the focus of the film.
Yeah. Has some great dancing in it.
Oh, yeah.
Like for people that are,
Absolutely.
I think, maybe rightfully dismissive of it, those people should maybe watch some of the numbers because it's.
I mean, they're very legitimate breakdancers.
Yeah.
Like really.
Both Breakin' and its sequel have some really incredible, imaginative sequences, including one in Breakin' 2 where.
Oh, yeah.
He dances on the ceiling in an
Boogaloo
homage
Shrimp,
to Fred Astaire's. Which film was that?
I think it was Royal Wedding.
Yeah. Quite an incredible scene, actually.
I think those are always some of my favorite scenes in both Breakin' and Breakin' 2 are the ones with Boogaloo Shrimp. He does some really creative, amazing stuff.
So good. The one where he dances with the broom.
Yeah, which I think is also
original.
kind of a Fred Astaire homage in some ways.
Totally.
So,
Yeah, it's straight from whatever film that was where Fred was dancing with the hat rack.
That might also be Royal
Was
Wedding.
that also
Maybe.
Royal Wedding?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it might have been.
But I think so. Yeah.
What's your number 6?
My number 6 is Streets of Fire.
Streets of Fire is my number 2.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. It should probably be higher, but...
Excuse me. It's a Walter Hill action movie set in an unnamed city, which is clearly Chicago.
Sort of a comic book fantasy version.
Yeah, comic book fantasy version of Chicago. And it's about a rock singer played by Diane Lane, who is kidnapped by a motorcycle gang headed by Willem Dafoe.
In the craziest costume you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And her ex-boyfriend, who's a soldier of fortune, comes back to the city to save her. He's played by Michael Pare.
Yep.
He teams up with her agent/manager, played by a wormy little Rick Moranis. And they have these amazing adventures, action-packed adventures across this neon-drenched nightscape of this sort of futuristic, but also like 1950s version of...
Retro-futuristic, I guess.
Retro-futuristic version of Chicago. it is just a movie unlike any other movie ever made. And there aren't many movies you can say that about. Even the best movies often resemble other movies. This one does not. This movie looks like and feels like no other film that exists.
That's true.
The closest you could get to it is probably another movie by the same director, which was The Warriors.
The Warriors.
Walter. So this is just, and it's just full of the greatest music. It's music by Jim Steinman, who was Meatloaf's partner, who wrote all the Bat Out of the Hell. He wrote like Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Yeah.
Bonnie Tyler
Power
music,
ballad.
Holding Out for a Hero.
Bombastic. Yeah.
Yeah. He just wrote these massive 8-minute songs, and they fit so beautifully into this movie, which is wonderful. Just so much fun, minute by minute. So it was an easy number 2 for me because I knew what my number 1 was from the beginning. But
I just think it's like one of the coolest movies. To me, it's so cool.
It is. It is a very, very cool movie.
Yeah, I love it.
And should be known better than it is. So if you're hearing this podcast and you've never heard of Streets of Fire, then do yourself a favor, friends, and go check it out.
Yep.
What's your number 5?
That was True Stories, which we talked about.
Mine was The Great Muppet Caper.
That is in a tie at my number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my favorite Muppet movie.
It's so good.
Which is saying something, because I do love most of the Muppet movies.
Yeah, it's hard not to love most of them, especially the ones from this era.
But this was my favorite. It's like sort of the most self-referential. All the jokes land.
Oh, gosh.
The performances are great. Charles Grodin is hilarious.
Yes.
And it has really, really fun songs, really self-referential, hilarious songs. It has a great John Cleese cameo, which I love. Yeah, I just love it. I think it's just the most fun movie.
So wonderful.
The Miss Piggy,
the Esther Williams
style swimming pool musical number is just
oh my God.
Chef's kiss.
It's total chef's kiss. And I think that opening is chef's kiss too. It's like sometimes you and I will pop it in just to watch the opening of that movie. That is it's a masterclass in self-reference and madcap zany fun.
How to do it well.
Yep.
Cool. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is Eddie and the Cruisers.
That is also my number 4.
Oh, hey, look at
Sync.
that. Yeah, Sync. I love Eddie and the Cruisers. It's Michael Pare in another 80s musical somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happens.
The star of Streets of Fire. Also a similarly cool.
Yes.
Also early 1960s style.
Cool guy.
He's playing kind of this. If the guy from Streets of Fire sang, he would be Eddie in Eddie and the Cruisers.
Yeah.
You want to describe it? It's kind of an interesting genre mashup.
I'll try. I think you'll do a better job describing it than me. But it's sort of like a noir meets musical mystery kind of thing, right? It's about a band called Eddie and the Cruisers that started to become popular in the early 60s, I think, kind of in that New Jersey, in that sort of Bruce Springsteen part of New Jersey. So they started to become really popular, and then all of a sudden, what exactly happens? It's like they're recording I think it's their second album, maybe.
They're recording this kind of more experimental album, and Eddie is killed in a tragic accident.
I didn't know if he
sort of a very James Dean style accident where his car goes off a bridge and he disappears in the river. They never find his body. And the master tape for that album disappears that same night.
Right.
And nobody knows what happened to it. And then 20 years later, in the 80s, 25 years later, all the band members they're contacted by somebody mysteriously who's hunting for that tape, and it becomes kind of almost a quasi crime thriller mystery movie. But it's just it bounces back and forth between the present day, which was the mid 80s, and the early 60s. And you can see the way that being in that band and making that music had repercussions for all the people in the band, all of their lives. Years later in different ways that are very interesting because the characters all kind of turned out kind of different.
Yeah. Well, and the death of Eddie also was a big deal for them. I think it has some interesting things to maybe say about nostalgia a little bit. And it's another
and
one
maybe
of
fame
fame,
and like
nostalgia,
idol worship.
Yeah, idol.
Yeah.
Yes, all of those things. I think it's another one of those movies that I think is just super cool.
It
Like,
is. And like Streets of Fire, it's also become a cult classic. Like Streets of Fire, it was also on HBO all the time, which is how a lot of Gen Xers like myself are even aware of it, because it's not something that ever would have been on my radar.
Yeah.
But it was just on all the time, and I just thought it was the coolest movie.
I think it's got a masterful mix of tone in it too, like where it's got some melancholy, but it's got some suspense, but it's got some fun. Like it's a well blended movie, I think.
So perhaps that's our second maybe lesser known movie that we're recommending.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
Streets of Fire and Eddie and the Cruisers. You could have a Michael Pare double feature.
You could, weirdly enough.
That would be a fun night. Those movies actually would pair really well together, too.
I think they would.
Yeah, they both got elements of film noir to them. Yeah.
We should say that the music is also...
it's so good.
Let's talk about the music. It's so good.
Yeah, it's by John Cafferty, who's a Jersey bar band singer. He sounds and writes music that's a lot like Bruce Springsteen.
I mean, it's very clear that that's part of the
Eddie
inspiration
is
here.
Largely based on Bruce Springsteen. There's just no way to avoid saying that. Yeah.
Yep.
But the music is really good. It really holds up.
Yeah.
There was a song
I love it.
called On the Dark Side, which was a hit at the time.
That's a great song.
Yeah, great song. But the whole soundtrack is great.
Yeah, 100%.
What's your number 3?
My number 3 is maybe your number 1, I'm guessing. Footloose?
Yep.
Yeah. Footloose.
Yeah. My number 1 is Footloose. It's a different kind of musical. It's an 80s musical. It's that thing of making music videos into a movie.
Yeah.
It's full of all of these sequences that could be pulled out of the film and exist as music videos, essentially. It's like MTV with a narrative laid into it. But I actually think what elevates it beyond movies that did similar things, like Flashdance, for example, is that the narrative that is laid into it is actually really good. It's based on a true story of a town where dancing was made illegal.
Yeah.
And this kid from Chicago moves to this town. They don't say where it is, but I believe it's in Utah somewhere.
That's where it's shot too. I think they shoot it in Utah.
And it's a very religious, very conservative town, kind of ruled over by this very conservative minister played by...
led. I wouldn't say he rules over it, but
not rules over. Yeah, but he's like
he's the moral compass.
He's
of
the moral
town.
compass of the town. Yeah. Played by John Lithgow. And it's Kevin Bacon rebels against him.
Yep.
I don't need to describe the plot from Footloose. People know what Footloose is. But what I will say is this, is if you haven't seen it in a long time, watch it again and watch it and pay attention to, watch the whole movie from the perspective of the Lithgow character.
Yeah.
Because here's what I didn't realize as a kid when I loved it, because I loved the music and I thought Kevin Bacon was cool and I thought all the dance scenes were really cool.
Yeah.
And I thought the tractor chicken scene was awesome. And
right.
just all, it's just, there's so much pleasure to be found just aesthetically from all the music and all the colors and all the dancing. And the young kids, Sarah Jessica Parker. I mean, they're all, Chris Penn is great in it as the sidekick guy.
Yep.
As an adult, what I think that I now see in it is that it's really showing this guy from another era who takes a lot of responsibility for the sort of direction of young people and of the people of this town. As somebody who grew up in a small town, I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. And I recognize my town in this movie and the insularity of the town. And it's just interesting. I have a lot of, I saw him as the villain in this movie when I was a kid.
You would, right?
And now I don't see that at all.
No,
I really feel for his character. And I think that the movie could have the easiest thing in the world would have been to make him the villain.
Yeah.
And so many 80s movies about young people
totally would have
did that, including
did.
as much as he was like the bard of young people in the 80s. John Hughes was often guilty of just making the parents he often kept off screen, but making parents into
They were the other. They were
the
them.
other, these villainous
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
And Footloose deserves a lot of credit for
100%. Yeah.
Presenting that character with nuance and empathy.
Yeah. Well, that's why I wanted to say it wasn't that he ruled over the town, because the thing as an adult that you do get from it is he like really cares about his town, about the people in it. And he's also traumatized. He lost a
He
child.
lost his son.
As a result. I mean, and that's partially why I think they got rid of dancing, right? It had something to do with how these kids died.
His son they were dancing and drinking.
Yeah,
and then he
partying,
died in
etc.
a drunk driving accident.
So, that was, but he also, there are all these great scenes of him slowly coming around in the film. And you can also see that he is not like an iron fist because, I think there's a scene where a bunch of the townspeople decide to burn books for some reason. And he's totally against that. And he runs down there. He's like, what are you doing? So, that's actually, you're right. As an adult, a really great and fulfilling way to view the movie, I think. It's kind of interesting. Yeah.
And it's also helped along by the fact that they hired two great actors to play the parents. It's Lithgow and Diane Wiest plays his wife, and she has even less to do in the movie than he does, and she's so good in it.
My gosh, yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. There's a really moving scene at the end where the kids have finally been granted permission to have the dance just outside the town limits, the city limits, and Lithgow and Diane Wiest kind of go out there to spy on the kids, and they're out in this field outside where they're having the dance, and they are reminiscing about when they used to go to dances as when they were their kids' age, and it's a
really
very
sweet.
Lovely scene.
Yeah. What a tender screenplay that is.
It
really
is a great screenplay. Yeah. All right. Do we get your number 2?
Well, my number 2 was a tie between The Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan because I have a lot of love for Muppets Take Manhattan as well.
It is a lot of fun.
It may not be quite as chef's kiss as Great Muppet Caper, but I love it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to love about it, I think.
And what was your number 1?
My number 1 was Dirty Dancing.
Oh, of course, Dirty Dancing,
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like, I think Footloose is sort of your Dirty Dancing in a way. So, similar.
I do have a lot of affection for it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's a movie that means a lot to me.
Yeah.
So some of the other thing, let's see. I'm looking at the list.
Yeah. Anything else we want to highlight here?
Well, let's see. Popeye. That was a big Robert Altman.
Yeah.
Robin Williams.
Was that was on cable a lot too, right? I didn't have cable, so I don't know, but I feel like it was on cable a lot.
It's pretty out of control and pretty bad. Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which was a huge hit, but is a real stinker. One from the Heart is a very interesting Francis Ford Coppola movie. He used a lot of technology like video playback for the first time on that movie.
Oh.
It's Terry Garr. It's shot entirely in a studio that he constructed. Very interesting movie and just not a lot of fun to watch.
I've never seen it. I've
Apple,
heard about it. Oh.
Of course. Or listen to our Canon episode.
Yeah, the
we'll
Canon
talk about
classic, the Apple.
Earth Girls Are Easy.
That's a musical?
Yeah.
Okay.
School Days, which is Spike Lee's first big budget movie.
That's got a lot of cool stuff in it.
The Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond.
Oh, gosh.
All About Jazz, which was the autobiographical
All That Jazz,
movie by
Bob Fosse.
Bob Fosse, yeah. Can't Stop the Music. It's a terrible movie with the Village People. Victor Victoria, which is a Blake Edwards
Julie Andrews.
comedy, cross-dressing comedy, essentially. Chorus Line. Give my regards to Broad Street, which is Paul McCartney's terrible musical. The Little Mermaid, American Tail, All Dogs Go to Heaven. So there were plenty of like bad and decent. Little Mermaid is good, obviously, but there were also a lot of really bad cut rate. The Care Bears movie. There were some bad movies. Absolute Beginners, Crush Groove, which we mentioned, Cotton Club, which is another Coppola disaster.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and let me say about The Little Mermaid.
So there were actually a surprising amount for, considering it's not a decade, I think that leaps to mind when you're thinking of like golden eras of musicals. There was quite a lot of them.
Well, and I was just about to say about The Little Mermaid, that's kind of the jumping off point of the golden age of like the Disney movie musical as we kind of know it now.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
I mean, that was the first
Aladdin
one of
came
those.
after that,
Lion
and
King,
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast. It was just
it was
kind
a
of
huge hit.
one after the other. So it was kind of the start of that. A lot of influence there. So yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts? Do you want to sing any closing thoughts to us?
No, not really, but it was really fun to talk about this, and I hope people will seek out some of these lesser known musicals because they'll make you feel good. They're really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.